Let me know. You ready? Are we back with another 10 minutes with Cxffeeblack? This time we're talking about the fact that coffee is supposedly going extinct,
Right?
which is crazy. All right, what's the first question?
The first question.
Yep.
How is coffee going extinct?
So I think there's multiple reasons why people are saying coffee is going extinct. The first reason is climate change. So because the world is getting hotter and hotter, a lot of the coffee around the world is producing a lower yield, and people are having to move coffee up higher. Normally, coffee grows on mountains. Coffee's a fruit, by the way. It's not a bean. So, like, this is something that's growing on a tree, and this is the seed of a cherry that grows on that tree. And so coffee is being pushed up higher and higher. It's producing less and less. There was just a lot of information about, like, Brazil's harvest was super low. And Brazil is kind of seen as, like, the indicator of the way coffee is going to go globally because Brazil produces the most coffee in the world. The question is why, which I think leads to the second reason for why coffee is going extinct. The reason why Brazil produces the most coffee in the world is because Brazil is the place where the most Africans exist outside of Africa. Mm-hmm. Why are all those Africans in Brazil? Is because they were brought there for slave labor. And that slave labor was used to grow the coffee product into what it is today. It was used to make it so plenteous because of their labor, which wasn't included in the cost, which then turns into why that particular product is seen as a cheap product. Is because it was sold as something without the cost of those who are doing the labor factored into it. And so that because there was so much of that labor, it flooded the market and made it seen as a cheap product, which is a problem. Because the second reason why coffee is going extinct is because people don't want to grow it anymore. A lot of people don't anyway. Obviously, people love coffee all around the world. You know all about like the pre-indigenous history, pre-colonial history of coffee, the indigenous history of coffee that we talked about with the Oromo people and Bunakala and all the people in Ethiopia. And but a lot of people don't have this very like spiritual, philosophical, community-inspired relationship with coffee because, as I mentioned, so much of coffee was spread around the world after it was stolen in 1616 by the Dutch. I mean, the majority of it was spread around the world for the purpose of colonialism, for the purpose of, like, using slave labor to bring money to these colonial powers that were taking over these different countries, and coffee was a cash crop. And so, to go back to the point, a lot of people are just leaving. Like in Kenya, for instance, and other African countries, you're seeing people just leave coffee farms, right? Abandoning whole farms because the kids are like, yo, I saw my grandparents do this. I saw my great-grandparents do this. We got stories of colonial trauma. Like in the interview we did with the brother from Uganda from Mountain Harvest, he was talking about like they call naturally processed coffee chiboki. I believe I'm saying it right because chiboki means stick. And the reason why they call it stick is because people were beat with sticks to produce this coffee by colonialists. So it's literally like flogging coffee, you know what I'm saying? So like you think about that relationship. Of course, kids who have the internet, they don't want to do that. Their kids are on internet, on TikTok, just like all the kids in America are, and they're like, why would I want to go start an IT company? I don't want to do this. That's like asking African Americans, like, yo, why aren't more African Americans continuing to grow cotton?
Yeah, right.
Like, there's nothing you
like
can.
A trauma separation from it, you know what I'm saying?
So I think that's a part of the issue is because people have not been paid, because we haven't addressed the original sin of coffee.
Yeah.
On top of the climate change, there's just like a heart change. Like people are like, I don't deserve to be treated like this. And so just for the world to have coffee is not worth it for us to suffer. So I think a lot of people are like moving away from it. And then the last reason I think is kind of goes to this other thing. All of the coffee we consume is really just one species of coffee. Yeah. Right. And there's 120 plus different species of coffee. Coffee is indigenous to Africa. The reason why we only have one species of coffee that the world uses for the most part is because like everybody got that coffee not from the indigenous Africans who were stewarding it, right, in natural trade. They got it because somebody stole it from the Port of Mocha, and you know what I'm saying? That's all they had, so they ran away with the plug. They don't got the opportunity to like discover or explore the other varietals that might be more sustainable or the other species of that plant that might be sustainable. It's just Cxffea arabica is what was stolen, just like Cxffea Cxffea Conifera, which is known as Robusta, which is like the second species that most people use. Is using like instant coffee, and because those are the two species, like especially with Arabica, which is the predominant amount of coffee consumed in the world, like that is you're basically maxing out the genetic profile, and so you find out like this plant which had been naturally placed by God in Ethiopia and other parts of East Africa, like when you start trying to make it work and force people to then make it work in other parts of the world, you're realizing, oh, the environment is not necessarily correct for this. There's other pests that exist in these other places that didn't exist in where it was created. There's other plants that are that don't want to share the space. There's other natural issues that you run into, and so that's why we're like, if you brew better, do better. Like, you got to care for this giant and not just be forcing it. And I think that's part of the issue with coffee is like it just turns into this thing that's about productivity, both in how it was grown and also how we consume it, instead of really cherishing and enjoying what it has to say to us and what God has to say to. Anyway, so that's another reason why I think coffee is going to extinct. The third reason is just because like the genetic profile on Arabica is being maxed. And I don't think that means the world won't have coffee, but I think a lot of places in the world that are growing coffee won't be able to continue doing so. In contrast to the places where like coffee is still growing naturally in the wild in Ethiopia, Arabica specifically, but there's also 119 other species that are growing in the wild. And I guess like my question is, are we going to allow the same thing to happen with the next thing? But let's get into the next question because I think that's right there.
For sure. My next question segues from your other one. You in the beginning of this most recent soundtrack for the documentary we have, you had this poem where you talked about it's not going to be here too much longer. In the Coffee Makes You Black poem. So with it not being here too much longer, what is the future look like for that? For Coffee Black, for the world?
If I'm being honest, I think the future is indigenous plants in Africa. Like I think the future is the root, right? Like people are going to have to return to the source. There are like 119 other species outside of Arabica that could be used to replace the current kind of coffee we consume. Even Robusta, right, is being seen. Some people are pushing it more. There's more experimentation about like how to make it the flavor profile different, because Robusta has twice the amount of caffeine that the species Arabica has, but it also has half the fats and sugars. And if you know, people already don't like black coffee, even if it's Arabica, because they think it's bitter. Too bitter. Too bold. So if that's the case, then when you look at a species that's even more perceived to be bitter, and we can get into like, there's a lot of people like Win Coffee Co. and other like farmers who grow Robusta who are doing work with like fine Robusta or experimental processing with Robusta and trying to add a lot of the care and attention that you see for a species like Arabica when it's done right to Robusta and allowing that coffee to really reach its full potential and shine. But outside of those two, there are also 118 other species, right? Literally. That are in Africa in the wild that have the potential to be even better tasting than Arabica is. For instance, one is Stenophila. We got a shirt around here somewhere with the Stenophila shirt, but it's a West African species. One of the homies actually has some growing on his farm in Nigeria, which is pretty dope. Shout out to the homies at Oye Coffee. But like, I think there's a lot of potential there. But to me, I'm like, if we don't learn our lesson from the environmental over extraction that was done, with the human over extraction that was done, and with the lack of dignity and honor, to me, for the people who received it first, like God had given them a whole philosophy about how coffee should be treated, which is Bunaf Nagea Hendabina, the Gada system. Wherever there's coffee, there must also be peace. Is what the elders told us from Oromia. They told us that. And I think to me, coffee has never actually honored that. And so because of that, I think it's just a natural consequence is you using the technology wrong. You know what I'm saying? So we need to re-tap in with the manual, with the user manual, and update our iOS to be able to reflect the actual like perspectives that were meant to be had.
Get back to that foundation.
To honor your root, right? Because if you don't honor your root, you're gonna look up one day and there's not gonna be any fruit. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's the biggest thing that we need to return to for coffee. And I think one of the interesting things is like, even when you look at I think it's Stenophila, which is the new species, like a lot of the research, again, it's kind of concerning to me because I'm like, are we not going to learn our lesson again? The people who are growing the coffee are not being positioned, like this is in Sierra Leone. But it doesn't seem like the people who are growing the coffee are being positioned to be able to have control, right, and self-determination over the export of that crop. All the research and all the people who are experimenting on it, I'm saying, are people from outside that community kind of starting to tell the story over again. And because of how the coffee industry works, I guess my opinion that the coffee industry, specifically the specialty coffee industry, runs off of novelty. And so because of that, like if the people who are introducing the new novel product, those are generally the people who make the most off of it, which is why I think Africans make so little on coffee, is because they didn't get a chance to introduce their product to the world. Like it was introduced, but not from their perspective.
It was ripped out of their hands.
Yeah. Well, we got 30 seconds left. Last question.
Last question in 30 seconds.
Yep.
Dog, a lot of pressure. I guess my last question is this. 19 seconds.
Yep.
How's Coffee Black changed that narrative?
I think it's by honoring our root, by partnering with indigenous farmers, and honoring the perspective of making sure when we bring coffee, there must also be peace, and meeting with the Abagadas and Adasinques. Renata and I actually made one, but all right, we out of time. We'll talk about that later. Peace. Jeez, crazy. Black.